approximately 128 million trees that are within the inventory. We also have the natural teak in the protected area, but we will leave it in terms of the conservation only. Okay. Okay, and in terms of the plantation making by state-owned forest industry organization, so you can see that the stock of the tree, so it's mostly that we will focus on the 30 years of felling cycle. Okay, imported is quite fluctuated, especially for the last 2 years when we got the impact from the coronavirus. And at the same time, for the export tick that you can see is that like now going down, because that we can see that for the tick community of Thailand that could not in a good competition with others, especially from Africa and Brazil and also Indonesia. So we would like to move to another of the commodities in terms of the wood production, the rubber. The rubber plantation across the continent or across the global, so included 28 countries with more than 12.7 million hectares that can produce for the rubber. So mostly the rubber is under the smallholders. So we can see is that number of smallholders is getting up just only after the COVID-19. And also another cause of the reduction of the planted smallholder is coming from other agricultural commodities like durian. They're giving more incentive to the farmer. So the number of the rubber farm that's like now a little bit reduced. Okay. And the next one will be the eucalyptus, with demanding for the domestic use is more than 5 million tons per year. With the major of the business company like AA, they need a very certain amount of the product from eucalyptus. Mostly eucalyptus they send it to the paper mill and the wood chip that to export. And apart from that, the majors of the product is to be the furnitures. Like now, the Thailand have allowed 2,500 of forest-based business companies that dealing with the forest product from wood. We can say is that more than 2/3 of the number of the companies that's dealing with the furnitures. So you can see that to show you for eucalyptus wood processing, it's like a strip from the northeastern part of Thailand down to eastern province near Pattaya, because the seaport is located here in Chonburi province near Pattaya that we organize for the field trip for the interested people that to go to see as well. Okay, so the national strategy to promote economic forest is coming. So like, okay, we try to amend of the law and regulation to support economic. And we also encourage the small owners as to grow the small economic trees as to meet the demand in terms of the orders of organization of the land area. So we sign the contract with the communities to grow the tree. Like in degraded forest areas, that we have the regulation, like you have to plant more than 20% of total area for economic trees. The seeding, we provide a lot of seeding, more than 50 million seedling a year to promote for agriculture, for small farming of the economic forest. Okay, and then we promote for the export by the reducing the export tax and tariff. Like now, the export sawnwood that we reduce down to 10% of the tax. Okay, so we encourage for the small farmer that could use the tree for the program that can loan the money from the bank. Okay, the forest certification of Thailand, we right now under the production of the CNI, that basis on the support by the ITTO. And also we engage with the international standard like FSC as well. So we got a lot of support from the EU for the VPA implementation basis on the program like we already mentioned. For the VPA, we starting to develop the program we call the E3. The E3 it means that the smallholders that can put the online into the to inform it that the tree is placed in their farmland, and they will provide for information updating until they can exporting to the others. So they have some of the registration and the cloud check information like this is going online. When they cut the tree, they can show it into the updating every day. So let's say that like now there are more than 10 million trees, economic trees registered by the smallholder and the farmers. And then we provide for the paperless to make the price transparency with the linkage with the certification under ASEAN community. So like now we have that more than 90,000 of the certificated hectare under the Forest Industry Organization. We also sending the wood chip with the guarantee for the certification to others like a timber, but it's not small number, and timber legality verification that to show you in very quickly, and the supply chain controls that to make that to make sure is that everything that's going into the good and order. So in the last slide that I would like to summarize that Thailand is right now that regional forest product manufacturing hub that we are competing with the China and Vietnam in terms of the reprocessing. It's the one largest producer of plantation and rubber timber because we focus on our domestic production of the eucalyptus and the rubber. The Bao Thailand wood industry rely on the rubber wood and eucalyptus, as I already mentioned, that for the smallholder. Pulp and paper is coming to be the very strongly of the volume consumed industry. Still imported tropical from neighboring country, and voluntary new requirement legal for the EU deforestation free is starting to make everything in terms of transparency. That we try to reduce our leakage of the forest band into the source of origin. The overall law awareness certification legal wood product, because it's very costly for the smallholder, but we try to make our own standard to certify for the forest product. Lack of data is still be a very crucial thing that we need to do the survey. And the last one, strong private sector operating in the wood production sector that can move forward for the sectors of the country. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Preacher, for taking, exactly on time. So that was very much appreciated. Thank you for that. Yes, very interesting presentation. We're going to move swiftly on. I think two things that came out of that presentation for me were certainly the amount of chips and particles involved in the chain, the actual complexity of the supply chains as you add value to products in these countries, which of course could come into conflict with new requirements for traceability. It is very difficult to track products through such complex supply chains, particularly when it's relatively low value, like a lot of waste material and chips. I'm going to move on now to introduce you Lyndall Ball, who is a forestry officer at the the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, an organization you're very familiar with. And actually, she will, I think, comment on some of these issues in her presentation, because she is talking about the role of forests and forest products in a bioeconomy transition, supply and demand transition perspectives. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks very much. Oh, is that working? Yeah. Thanks very much, Rupert, and thanks, Preacher, for that interesting presentation. And so we're going to move from that really applied look at the importance of forests in our society, and I'm going to move up to a more global perspective. And as Rupert said, look at the role of forest and forest products as we look to really decarbonise our societies. So in the presentation today, I'll give a very high overview around the global trends that are impacting our forests and the resources, what's sort of going on from a global perspective with forest resources. What are those big factors that are influencing the demand or decrease of demand for forest products? What are those key reasons as to why we should be expanding the use of sustainable forest products? And as Rupert said, you know, that the outlook for forest products, including those from tropical areas, are expected to be bright. And then I'll include that those expectations with some recent findings from FAO and ITTO on a forest sector outlook. So I don't need to tell anybody in this room, or hopefully anybody on the globe, that we need to address an urgent climate challenge. But similarly, we have a increasing nature and biodiversity challenge, and, you know, again, not news to anybody in this room, and unfortunately every arrow that you see on that slide is going in the wrong direction. However, the arrows on this slide go in precisely the other direction, with an ongoing increase in the demand for materials. And as Rupert said in his opening remarks, we see a global population that continues to increase. We see a doubling consumption of natural resources out to 2060. But I guess here's the big one. Our consumption of natural resources is by far and made up of non-renewables. And so if we are going to do something about those big systemic challenges of biodiversity, nature and climate, we really have to do something about that final circle on that page, and how are we going to decrease largely those that use of fossil-based non-renewables. And so there you have these sort of three interlinked challenges that the world faces. So again, not news to anybody in this room, but of course forests are a key part of addressing those solutions, those challenges. And so we have forests. We can't meet our climate goals without forests. Forests provide the majority of our fresh water needs. Forests, of course, host the majority of our terrestrial biodiversity, and trees and forests are going to play a key role in restoring those large areas of degraded land. So there's, I guess, those sort of forest-based values. But as people, we are completely reliant on forest products, and the trends, as I'll continue to touch on through the course of this presentation, are that we need to increase our dependence on bio-based products, but particularly wood-based ones. And of course, we all know in this room that we use forest products for a variety of uses, but housing is a particularly important one, and I'll continue to pick up on that during this presentation. So if we think that we have an increasing demand, or should have an increasing demand for forest resources, where are we at the moment from a global resource perspective? So overall, we do continue to see a decrease in forest area, and there you can see that from over that last decade or so, we have continued to see overall forest loss. And whilst the trends in forest loss are going in, I guess, a decreasing, deforestation as a percentage is decreasing, so is the percentage of forest expansion. So overall, whilst there are some positive signs there from a deforestation perspective, the global forest area does continue to shrink. And there you can see in that slide the trends in forest area change over since 1990. And over the last decade, you can see that Africa unfortunately had the highest net forest loss of forest area. And I guess sort of alongside that, expansion of forest area and deforestation, is we have this extremely large area that is available for restoration. My understanding is that that is an area of around 2 billion hectares, which is an enormous area of land. Of course, not all of this is necessarily appropriate for forest-based restoration, but a percentage of it is, and a large percentage of it, trees will play an important role. And so a discussion that we should be continuing to have is what areas of those lands may be appropriate for afforestation, and of that, is there some that could be could help supply some of our wood supply needs? So just now moving on and having a look at what are some of those factors that are influencing our wood demand. So just looking back a little over the last few decades, we can see an overall increase in our demand for wood. However, there is actually an overall decrease in the per capita consumption of wood. Most likely that's a reflection of increased efficiency. And I just put this slide in just as a demonstration of I guess our sector's capacity to respond to differing market needs and demands on forest resources, and perhaps reflect on a year that none of us want to reflect on back in 2020. But you can see that change, particularly looking at that paper and paperboard. It's actually an increase in demand for that product as we all move to online use and packaging. But in response to these, I guess, changes and expected changes in the use of renewable resources in our economy, we commissioned a report to look at forest product use in the global economy, the global bioeconomy, sorry, and to develop a bit of an understanding of some key products and where are the general trends in the use of those products, or where are the expected trends. So probably completely unexpected outcome here, where there is an ongoing decrease in newsprint consumption and paper and writing material. So overall graphic paper trends are declining, but that is the only area here where you'll see an arrow in that direction. Construction will continue to drive the vast majority of the demand for wood, and I'll touch on this again later, but there you can see some sort of estimations there that out to 2050 you have a over 100% increase in demand for veneer and plywood, and around 70% of increase in demand for particle and fibreboard. Much smaller numbers that we're talking about here, but there's increasing focus and interest in resins and wood-based chemicals, and it is an area that is expected to have continued focus and a bright outlook for continued growth. Again, much smaller areas, and often it can rely on waste streams that we have in our production facilities, but the expected demand for wood-based fibres for textiles is also one that is expected to continue to increase. And again, this is a sector that I continue to see increased focus on the demands on this sector to reduce its emissions profile. And one way it can do that is to move to more bio-based resources like wood. So now wanting to move on and talk a little bit more on sort of, I guess, not only the why we should be expanding the use of sustainable forest products, because I don't think that's really news to anybody here in this room particularly, but just how big that potential the potential challenges are, and I guess the potential for increasing the demand in the use for our products, and why that is. And not completely, but largely is the building and construction sector, the built environment. The focus on this sector, just, over the last year, couple of years, to decarbonise has just, the focus, I notice, even month to month, week to week, seems to increase. And that is because this sector has this extraordinary emissions profile of around 40% of global energy and process-related greenhouse gas emissions. And there's incredible pressure on this sector to decarbonise. And one area of that relates to the products it uses. And so there is pressure on this sector to move from fossil-based products such as cement and steel to forest-based or to bio-based products, but particularly wood. And of course, we all know about, I guess, the good news story of the use of mass timber for tall timber buildings. A recent unit report came out with that point you can see at the bottom of the page that said substituting conventional materials with mass timber could, place the emphasis on could, reduce global emissions by 14 to 31%. It is important to note that report goes on to make important messages around I guess the importance of safeguarding forest resources and making sure we have enough if we were to, come close to benefiting from that transition to wood-based products. And a few weeks ago, I was at a Woodrise conference which focuses on mass timber buildings, and there was this wonderful showcase of these incredible buildings that are being built all around the world out of mass timber. But there was nearly every single one of the presentations, somebody asked the question around supply. Have we got enough wood? And here are the big numbers. The World Bank a few years ago estimated that we have around 3 billion people who will need housing by 2030. And that equates to around 300 million new dwellings, with the majority of those being in the global south. And these numbers, I don't know if any of you have seen these before, but they're really quite staggering, that the expectation of new floor area is around 240 billion cubic metres. The New York City every month for 40 years. Now, even if these are an overestimation, the underlying message is that the expectation is that there is going to be a huge demand for infrastructure over the coming decades. And so with all that in mind, a couple of years ago, FAO, together with ITTO and Unique Consultancy, commissioned this, really important piece of work on a forest sector outlook to better understand the future demand and sources of timber. And so I'll give you now some of the outputs from that work. This was released at the 2022 Committee on Forestry report Committee on Forestry meeting, COFO, in 2022. The report has sort of two main elements to it. It provides both a business as usual outlook, and then it does a bioeconomy scenario where it does look at some increased use of mass timber in the built environment and increased use of those of wood-based textiles. So in a business as usual scenario, this report estimates that out to 2050, we will see a 37% increase in the use of, or in the consumption, of primary processed wood products. So that brings us to around 3 billion cubic metres of primary processed wood. The bulk of the demand for that wood under a business as usual scenario continues to come from Eastern Asia. And then the report also does some work looking in this bioeconomy scenario, looking at how much would increase use of wood in the built environment trigger, and similarly additional use of or demand for wood if we increase the use of man-made cellulose fibres in textiles. And it estimated, as you can see there, somewhere between 100 and sort of 300 million cubic metres per year. So importantly, if we're going to meet these demands for wood, alongside that goes significant investment challenges. And the report made some estimations around what that might be. Again, I think the important message here is really just the magnitude of the investment needs if we are going to meet the demands for wood products. So from an investment in both new and modernisation of existing industries, we're looking at around 25 billion per year. From to invest in those mass timber and wood-based textiles facilities, we're looking somewhere between sort of 1.4 to 2.5 billion. And from increasing our wood supply, particularly from forest plantations, you're looking at somewhere between sort of 1 and 5 billion. So it's a lot of money. And then finally, just really wanting to touch on, okay, so hopefully there's a convincing story there that the outlook is bright and that we are going to need more wood, and in order to supply that wood, we probably need to look at expanding the estate. And this report concludes that it is likely that the additional wood supply needs will come from the planted forest sector. It estimates that to meet that business as usual scenario, we are looking at around 33 million new hectares of commercial plantations. However, as you can see, it is also based on some important criteria, and that is that production from naturally regenerated forests remains stable, that we have this high use of residues as virgin wood fibre substitutes. I think this one I find incredibly interesting, that the average productivity of those new plantations sits at around 15 cubic metres per hectare. You know, I think that's relatively high. And that we have to look at a range of modalities in which we're going to establish these forests. So finally, I'm not going to go through this in any sort of exhaustive sense, and I don't even think it's an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to touch on, I guess, the range of actions that we might want to start to consider if we are going to realise really the opportunities, I guess, that wood products offer in order for us to allow them to have the greatest impact possible on those, you know, really big environmental challenges that I set up at the outset. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That was absolutely fascinating. Again, I've noted down some of the figures. I'll let Stephen Midgley take his position, and while he's moving over there, just to make a few observations. Some of the figures I noted down quite remarkable. I hadn't realised that we're going to see doubling of consumption of natural resources, and that the available land for restoration was 2 billion hectares. So obviously a lot of potential for expansion of plantation area. And I imagine a lot of that's involving smallholders as well. And I'm very glad to say that we have somebody to speak on this issue of smallholders, which I know has occupied quite a lot of thought this morning. I think it's very important to address this issue also in the market discussion, because it is a critical part of the supply base. So Stephen Midgley, who is a consultant who's been involved in this industry, I think, for 50 years, I noticed on, yes, you look far too young for that. He runs a company called Solwood Asia Pacific. He's based in Australia, and he will talk to us today about community engagement and smallholders as pillars for Southeast Asian forest investment and regional wood supplies. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Rupert. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. This is a subject very close to my heart, as I hope I'll convince you. Lyndall has convinced us that as the populations grow and prosperity and aspirations grow, that wood demand's growing, and certainly wood consumption is increasing in the Asia Pacific. And we have this big question of, well, we need lots of wood, but how much? And quantifying that is difficult, but the answer is a lot. The four pretty credible estimates suggest that we'll need somewhere between 21 and 300% more wood by 2050. Now, this is a big ask. Then we think about what sort of wood we're going to need. And in this Finnish study, the blue histogram here is per capita GDP, so a measure of prosperity, a measure of wealth. So as you go from the left to the right, you get increased prosperity, but you'll see that consumption of wood panels increases dramatically as people become more prosperous. Increasing packaging paper increases as people become more prosperous, as does sawn wood, but graphic paper, for instance, and fuel wood decrease as people become more prosperous. But the point I'm making is that those big growth factors of wood panels, packaging paper, and sawn wood, a lot of that material can be met through fast-grown, small-size plantation timber, plantation wood. We know the demand is strong, but the supply is challenged. We definitely need more wood fibre. And just for wood chips alone, the Asian deficit, not the supply, is expected to increase from 20 million to 59 million cubic metres by 2030, which sort of is about double Australia's total annual wood cut. So it's a lot of wood. And China's deficit in wood chip is estimated to be about 33 million cubic metres. Now, we know from the presentations we've heard that expanded production from native forests is unlikely. So then we're left with the question, well, where's this wood going to come from? And the response is, well, plantations are going to expand, and the plantations occupy about 7% of our global forest area, but supply about 47% of our wood harvest. And as Lyndall said in her presentation, FAO concludes that we'll need an additional 33 million hectares of highly productive forests to meet industrial wood demand. I can rattle off these figures, but 33 million hectares is about the total global size of planted eucalypts. If we got every eucalypt in the world and put it in a plantation, it'd be about 33 million cubic metres. And it's taken 70 years and a lot of money and effort to create that. And we're expected to recreate that amount of forest in the next 20 years. It's a big job ahead of us. And expansion of conventional extensive plantations, the one we might see of thousands of hectares in blocks, they're certainly challenged in crowded Asian landscape. So how have we responded in this area to this challenge? We know that we can grow wood very efficiently. The soils, the temperature, the rainfall is suitable. We've got plenty of underutilized land. The species of choice, acacias, teak, rubber, eucalyptus all grow well. We've got fine technical skills, market demand strong, and the policy environments increasingly getting very favourable. But access to land. Where is this land? And what's the competition from agriculture and other land use? So access to land is, in my view, the major challenge to plantation expansion in this region. And the people who have land are communities and smallholders. There's a number of issues. You've got a whole lot of traditional and customary land use traditions that are sometimes not recognised by national laws. We've got issues of trust between the communities, government and companies. You've got issues of equity and decision making. Who decides whether or not we want trees on this block of land, or whether we want to have cassava or some other product? And how do we share the benefits? If someone gets rich out of all this, how are the benefits going to be shared? But the point I'm making is that this industry smallholder engagement offers a great social political license for companies to operate, and definitely investors are requiring that. But community engagement is now a major risk consideration for industry investment. So the point I'm making is that in this part of the world, that community and smallholder engagement is now a normal part of business. Now, smallholders are responding positively to this market demand and growing commercial wood, lots of commercial wood. Their motivation is, by and large, money and improving their livelihoods. The other benefits we've heard so much about around the room over the last couple of days of carbon, environmental benefits, these are important, but to these people, it's secondary. They're not victims, and they don't want charity. They're small business people. And to make sure that benefits accrue across the supply chain, we need a strong market. Strong markets mean industry. Industry is essential for these supply chains to function. Industry is not the enemy. One of our Australian colleagues some years ago did a seminal bit of work examining successful smallholder programs across a range of countries and cultures. He found that in Europe, South America, Southeast Asia, South Asia, that there were four common factors to successful smallholder programs. The first was unequivocal ownership of land and the trees. There can be no confusion over who owns the land and who owns the trees. We need a certainty of attractive and reliable markets for the things that are being produced. We need a robust technical package of practices. We don't want our plants to die of some fungus, 3 years after planting them. And we need sympathetic and legal and regulatory frameworks and environments. Now, governments can provide ownership, assurances of ownership, and they can also provide this legal and regulatory framework. But it's the private sector and R&D organisations that will have to provide the certainty of markets and the robust technical package. This is not a task that can be done by governments alone. To give you some idea of the magnitude of smallholder contributions to small commercial wood in the region, if we combined the smallholder resource of eucalypts and acacias, here I'm just talking about those two genera, eucalypts and acacia in China, India, and Southeast Asia, mainly Thailand and Vietnam, we'd have an area of about 10 million hectares. And this is producing commercial annual harvests of industrial wood of about 86 million cubic meters. Now, that's about a bit bigger than British Columbia, a bit bigger than Finland, a bit bigger than Germany, and a darn sight bigger than Australia. So the point I'm making is that smallholders matter. They're here, they're producing lots of wood, and all of us in this room are using it. 550 million Asian smallholders are producing more wood than some of the world's forestry giants, such as Sweden, Finland, and British Columbia. I'll run by a few examples. China, and is probably now approaching 6 million hectares of eucalypt plantations, which support large modern industries. And about between 70 and 80% of this is in small holdings of less than 10 hectares, plus the 4 round plantings, the plantings around roadsides, around canals, around homesteads. And this has taken off. I've given you a graph there of the top right of the steady expansion of China's eucalyptus estate. And the red arrow there shows when China implemented its land tenure reforms. So from that time, people were certain that if they had access to that land, they had ownership of that land, then they could invest in trees. And there's a paper I strongly recommend to you by Yuan Yi, who found that after China implemented these land tenure reforms, some responsibility for this forest land was devolved to some 600 million people, and the households invested far more time, money and resources into their forests, and forest cover was much greater in the areas where the local people had more guarantees over their land tenure. So the findings found that in that social economic circumstance, that clearly defined and well-protected household property rights had a very, very positive effect on planting trees. India, and I was very pleased to hear the comments from our Indian colleagues, where 80% of all the wood for pulp, paper, all the industries comes from farm-grown timber. Trees outside, trees and agroforestry systems in India, and trees outside farms form the foundation for their forest industries. In Vietnam, it's an extraordinary story. We now have 2.2, 2.3 million hectares of acacias, probably 1.8 million hectares of these in small holdings. When I offer figures on smallholders, you'll appreciate that very few people go out and measure small holdings, and it's very much an estimate. And this estimate, the only time the wood gets measured from a small holding is when it turns up at the mill gate to be processed. But Vietnam has become the world's biggest export of hardwood wood chips based on this plantation resource of acacias. And we've estimated that puts money into the pockets of those growers in Vietnam, money directly into the pockets exceeding $800 million annually. Again, the Vietnamese implemented land tenure reforms, and the graph on the bottom there shows the steady expansion of Vietnam's acacia resource, and the red arrow shows when those land tenure reforms were implemented. So another example of land tenure reform having a substantial impact on smallholder production. So the top slide here is a typical landscape in central Vietnam, dominated by multi-aged acacia plantations in small blocks owned by different farmers. And it's been an enormous success, but the success has been underpinned by this land tenure reform. And if you do go to Vietnam and talk to Vietnamese colleagues, ask them about the impact of the Vietnamese Red Book. It's been substantial, and it's a wonderful success story. In Thailand, it's good to be back, Kun Pricha. Thank you. We have about 800 hectares of eucalypt plantations. We don't know how many exactly, because that's what I said, very few people measure hectares for smallholders. But 95% is privately owned. Kun Pricha gave us the figures of how much wood is harvested, but it's now the #3 hardchip wood exporter in the world, including to neighbouring Laos, where I spent a lot of my time, where we imported $90 million worth of eucalypt wood chips last year. But again, Thailand had its own promotion programs. Way back in 1994, they implemented their private tree farm incentive plantation program, and where the little red arrow is, and eucalypt plantations have steadily increased since that time to provide the foundation for pulp and paper industries, MDF industries, and veneer industries. So all this sounds pretty good. We've got some challenges ahead. Industry, I stress, is central to success. Without industry, nothing happens. We don't have any market pull to make the supply chain function. For our growers, no one benefits if productivity collapses. And I'm grateful to Lyndall for raising the issue of productivity, because unless we maintain productivity of the plantations, we just need more hectares. And I hope I've convinced you that it's very difficult getting more hectares. So it's a bit easier, I think, to concentrate on maintaining productivity. There's issues, innovative new issues about access to finance, so growers can use their trees as collateral for getting loans. There's issues about market reliability. If they get, for instance, in the rubber market, you get volatile markets, prices go up and down, and that doesn't help or doesn't encourage smallholders. And we need government to support to reduce bureaucratic burden. And I'll come back to this later about offering simplicity to smallholders. Certification for smallholders has become costly, it's become complex, it discriminates against a smaller grower. The new European deforestation regulation also causes headaches for small growers. It causes increase in cost, increase in complexity for which they're not reimbursed. So, and for industry, we're after, we want a reliable supply, an adequate supply. We want uniform and predictable quality of wood. And if we get those two things, we can offer attractive prices. But for both growers and the industry, management of risk is a serious issue. So we present this as a win-win-win for government, industries and smallholders. For government, we're seeing that positive contribution to the alleviation of poverty, economic growth and creation of new industries, employment and skills, effective utilisation of marginal lands or degraded lands, and we're beginning to address issues of climate change and issues around carbon. For smallholders, it offers profitable and sustainable land use options and creates assets that weren't there before. Increases farm household incomes, livelihoods, employment, and offers new opportunities, flexible harvest times when you're not busy with other things on the farm. And for industry, we get an expanded wood supply, strengthened engagement with the community to get that important social license and minimise land costs, because land costs are a major issue in plantations. So society, industry and smallholders can all profit. Well, when I was asked to make this presentation, Barney asked me, what about this for ITTO? And well, I'd say that ITTO has been well aware of all of this and has been a long-term player. And I've listed there a number of studies going back to 1990, where the ITTO Council requested guidelines for best practice for tropical forests up until last year. So what smallholders want from ITTO, and this is my view, we want supportive policies and advocacy, someone out there being a champion for us, for the smallholders. Market information and knowledge is so vital. If you're making a decision about what you're going to use for your farm, what you're going to use your farm for, you really need that a good foundation of market information and knowledge. So where are you? Please continue with that market information service. We need simplicity. And simplicity, I mean reducing complexity and reducing the costs. And I explained to you before about how certification and the emerging requirements for the European deforestation regulation are just adding layers and layers of complexity on smallholders who, in the end of the day, are growing trees on their own land. If ITTO could help with positive links with industry, that would be very, very helpful. And a recognition that many government decision makers need to have their skills enhanced when it comes to market analysis and access to reliable information. Often people are just not aware of the information that's available. And well, a work plan for ITTO, you've already written it all. This is one of your reports recently. I went through it and I found all these things are already there. So my final message to ITTO is you've already got it there. Just get on and do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, that was nice to have the very encouraging message at the end that we've got it already in ITTO's policies and business plans, but we just have to get on and do it. Yeah, very encouraging presentation. But I noticed there are obviously some real issues still, some obstacles to be built on. And obviously, one of the big issues is we need strong markets for these products. And of course, it's not only about volume, it's actually about making use of the volume of the types of wood that come out of the forests and developing often new applications. And of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, in Japan, in North America, and Europe, one of the big new applications that everybody is very excited about is the use of timber for mass timber construction, building high rises, high density construction in cities. So we've asked, I'm very glad to say we have an expert on that specific subject to talk to us today, Mr. Nobutaka Isoda, who is team manager for the planning group of the Sumitomo Forestry sorry, my Japanese is not good. The Tsukuba Research Institute, but he is one of the world's experts on mass timber in construction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for introducing me. Thank you for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to introduce mass timber in building industry at this market discussion. I'm Nobutaka Isoda from Tsukuba Research Institute, Sumitomo Forestry. Actually, I'm not an expert of mass timber, but my company, Sumitomo Forestry, is a timber business company. So today, I'll introduce very general information of mass timber and also show you Sumitomo Forestry related projects as examples of the latest mass timber projects. This is my presentation contents. At first, I'm explain what's mass timber and some examples of mass timber products. Secondly, I'll introduce some of examples to tell you how mass timber is used for the construction projects. Then I'll give you my opinion on how to use tropical timber for mass timber and conclude my presentation. First of all, I'm summarizing variety of wood products. Logs are sawn into lumber or lamina, or rotary cut into veneer or strand, or chopped into wood chips. Out of lumber and laminar and veneer and strand, a variety of engineered woods are manufactured. From wood chips, many kinds of wood products are manufactured, such as pulp for paper, even cellulose for biomass plastics. These products circled with orange line are used for construction members, especially these in the red lines used for the structural members. Roughly speaking, mass timber is a large dimension product of these structural members. I couldn't find the authorized definition of mass timber, but I can say mass timber is a category of wood products made by fastening or bonding smaller wood components with nails, dowels, or adhesives, and mainly used for structure members. Mass timber has these characteristics. It's safe and has proven performance. For mass timber products, its raw materials like lamina, veneer, and strand are sorted by density and strength and dried under proper control. So mass timber made out of these reliable raw materials has proven performance within a certain range. And as you know, timber can be burned, but burning speed is slow because burned wood becomes a char layer, which become a protective layer for the central part. So the strength of timber strength of timber retains. Even though mass timber is a big dimension product, it's lightweight compared with other building materials such as steel or concrete. And it's less CO2 emissions, and also it stores carbon in itself. So carbon can be fixed in timber for a long time in timber buildings. And in Europe, they say timber construction is efficient and cost saving because timber construction is faster than other structural assemblies. In case of Japan, the cost efficiency is not certain yet because there are not so many mass timber projects yet. And timber has good thermal and health benefits as well, especially mass timber because of its large dimension. Here you can see a variety of mass timber products. Nail laminated timber, dwell laminated timber, and glue laminated timber are classified with binding materials such as nails, dwells, and adhesive. Glue laminated timber and cross laminated timber are classified by grain direction such as parallel or crosswise. And these 4 types are made out of lamina. Then series of structural composite lumber are made out of veneer or strand. That includes laminated veneer lumber, parallel strand lumber, laminated strand lumber, and oriented strand lumber. Laminated strand lumber, laminated veneer lumber is made of veneer, and the other 3 types of are made of a strand and classified by strand length. And mass plywood panel is a quite new mass timber product. It's a thick plywood, like 5 to 30 centimeter thick. I summarized the variety of mass timber. It's like this table. Each mass timber products applied as a different structural members because the components and binder, grain direction, those are different. And in those products, glulam and CLT and LVL are now mainly used as mass timber. So I'll explain them in each. Glue laminated timber, which is also called glulam, is one of the oldest and widely used engineered wood products. It's made out of laminar bonded parallel to each other with the lengths of the members. It's able to arrange elements that are straight, curved, arched, and tapered. These photos shows a carved glulam as a structure of canopy of carriage porch at Austria Center, Vienna. Glulam is mostly applied as columns and beams of buildings or bridges. Next one is cross-laminated timber. It's often called as CLT, was invented in Europe and now spread into the world. It's kind of representative of mass timber. Several layered lamina stacked and glued crosswise at 90-degree angles. So CLT is strong and stable as a panel structure such as floors, walls, and roofs. CLT can resist high racking and compressive forces, even using relatively low density softwood such as spruce or Japanese cedar. In Japan, CLT is expected to use a lot of Japanese cedar trees, which have been planted a big amount after World War II, and now they are needed to harvest, replant, and regenerate. Next one is laminated veneer lumber. It has been widely used as a small dimension lumber in light frame construction, such as single-family homes in North America. It's now used as mass timber. Similar to plywood, it's made out of rotary cut thin veneer. Different between them is grain direction. Plywood is assembled by alternating veneers with different grain direction, but with LVL, all veneers are combined parallel to each other. Because of parallel grains, LVL applies as columns and beams similar to glulam, and also LVL is a good application for structural walls because it can be manufactured as a large panel. This is an example building of mass timber. It's actually my workplace, a new research building of Tsukuba Research Institute, Sumitomo Forestry. It's a just 3-story office building. And you can see 3 types of mass timber in this building. LVL is used for load-bearing walls which withstand lateral forces caused by earthquakes or winds. Wood species of this LVL is radiata pine from New Zealand. And CLT panels are applied as these ceiling finishings. They are also formwork for concrete slab. These CLT panels are made of Japanese cedar. And glulam, made of Japanese larch, is used as columns and beams. Like this example, some types of mass timber can be used for some different structural roles. Here are some photos during construction of this new research building. Timber is relatively lightweight, but it's a mass of timber, so we have to use cranes to construct them. But mass timber products are usually pre-cut or prefabricated before come to the building site. So installation at site is faster than conventional building way. This is the after completion. This building has built with 1,000 cubic meter of wood. These mass timber can store about 690 ton CO2 of carbon. These are overseas mid to large scale large-scale timber construction projects related with Sumitomo Forestry. And 4 projects circled with red line are mass timber office buildings. I'm introducing this 36 Wellington project in Melbourne, Australia. This building is just completed in this October, that last month, and 15-story wooden office building. Lower 5 floors are reinforced concrete frame, and 6th to 15th floor are wooden frame with RC core. About 4,000 cubic meters of timber used as the structural frame of this building. This amount of timber fixes about 3,000 tons CO2 of carbon. It's equal to a reduction of approximately 40% of CO2 emissions during construction processes compared to RC frame structure. Here is some photos during construction of timber frame structure. In this project, we applied hardwood glue laminated timber made of Victorian ash, which is a domestic species and locally manufactured into glulam in Australia. It's used as columns and beams. And CLT is also applied as floor panels. And the elevator shafts and the staircase are the concrete core, which stand to lateral force. This photo is the completed timber frame floor. Eventually, CLT floor can't be exposed as a ceiling finishing because of fire safety regulations. I'd like to introduce one of research project as well. This is an early tall wood project. It is a shake table testing of a full-scale 10-story timber building conducted in the US. This project is aimed to validate the resilient performance of mass timber structure with post-tension seismic technology. Colorado School of Mines led this project, and my company, Sumitomo Forestry, also joined it as one of the strategic partners. This project has been carried out in several phases. Phase 1 was the main test conducted by the US team and completed successfully. And phase 2 was led by Sumitomo Forestry. We renovated the test building to reinforce it to meet Japanese standards. Phase 2 test has also completed successfully, and now phase 2 test is undergoing. Through phase 1 and 2, we could validate the resilient performance of mass timber structure. And this 10-story test building is made out of many types of mass timber. Several timber companies cooperate with their products. Cross-laminated timbers are and mass plywood panels are applied as load-bearing walls. Laminated veneer lumbers are applied as columns and beams, and also some floors. Glulam, CLT, nail laminated timber, and dwell laminated timber are applied as floors. Then I'm speaking about the market, but I'm not good at market information. So CLT market has already become a worldwide market, and I could find the data such as the global market for CLT estimated at $1.2 billion in 2022, while glulam estimated at 7.6 billion. And global CLT production capacity is estimated at 2.8 million cubic meters in 2020, and will expand rapidly to reach 4 million cubic meters by 2025. The figure on the right side is a world map showing the number of active CLT manufacturers in each country in 2023. It is easy to see there are no CLT manufacturers in the tropical regions. Then how to use tropical timber as a raw material of mass timber. It's just in my opinion, but there are some challenges. Tropical timber is now not so much planted for building structural use. So I guess it's difficult to gather certain amount of tropical timber to manufacture mass timber products for now. And sawing, processing, drying, and bonding method would be different between tropical timber and current softwood timber. But I think we can make tropical timber into raw materials of mass timber if we have many trials and develop the technologies. It's still just my idea, but I think tropical timber is suitable for structural composite lumber, such as laminated veneer lumber or laminated strand lumber, because it's already the tropical timbers are already used as raw materials of plywood or particle board, and there is similar processes between plywood and LVL or particle board and LSL. This is my conclusion. Mass timber construction is a big wave to change cities into forests. By increasing mass timber building in cities, they become carbon stores, just like forests. Mass timber in the building industry has very important role towards the realization of decarbonized society. I hope tropical timber become one option of raw materials for mass timber in near future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nobu. That was fascinating. I'm very glad you ended on a note about the potential for tropical timber in that particular sector. Seems like there are opportunities, but also it will require a lot of capital investment, a lot of research and development to get to the stage where you are in Northern Hemisphere countries. So certainly an opportunity, but a long-term one. Now we're going to move back a little bit towards talking about smallholders. And this presentation, I think, is really significant because it reports on work that has been undertaken by CIFOR and ICWAF in the past, looking at domestic demand for wood in Africa. And if you've been doing any market analysis anywhere in the world, actually, it is extremely difficult to get good quality data on domestic demand for timber. And it's a huge, almost blank canvas on the map, how much wood is being used domestically. And Richard Iba-Ataya, who is very heavily involved in that research work, he is the principal scientist and regional convener for CIFOR and ICWAF in Central Africa. And he is speaking to us today about smallholder timber supply for domestic and regional markets in Central Africa, importance and challenges. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you. As you rightly mentioned, whenever you have statistics about timber products, the trade of timber products, people mainly focus on industrial timber products. And with CIFOR and ICWAF, we did some research to see what is the case of artisanal timber products, especially the consumption within countries in Central Africa. And this should apply also in other sub-regions of Africa. In terms of overview, in Central Africa, small-scale timber production is informal. Being informal doesn't mean that it's not organized. They are responding to growing national and regional demand. The volume produced are equal to or even greater than those exploited by the industrial sector. The species harvested are the same and as those used for export. They generate significant employment and income in rural and urban areas. They contribute little to the national accounts because it is always informal. The governments don't have figures about what is being done. And it takes a lot from forest than otherwise estimated. Here you can see how we compare the internal consumption from the informal sector to the industrial, the internal consumption and export from the more industrial sector. And you see that in some of the countries, mainly in the case of Cameroon, the domestic consumption is by far using the smallholder informal production. The same applies here. The figures that we developed show largely that in the countries of Central Africa, most of the domestic markets are supplied by the smallholders and informal but also illegal production. We have mapped the main roads here from mainly from Cameroon to Chad, but also Nigeria. The other main roads are from the Democratic Republic of Congo to the eastern part of the continent through Uganda, Rwanda, and going to Kenya. And to compare, I mean, a lot is being said about what Cameroon exports to China and to Vietnam recently. That is a lot less than what is exported to just the neighboring country of Chad. Although it's thought that maybe it goes up to Libya and so on. So it's very important, and it has a lot of impact on the forest resources. It's a significant source of income, although still the cubic meter at the local market is very cheap, but it's still a very important source of income. In CFA, we are speaking of 30 billion CFA francs. In the case of Cameroon, 6.4 billion in the Republic of Congo, 2.7 million in Gabon, and so on. So it not only creates is an important source of income for the operators, but also it creates employment. We have estimated that we have 40,000 people employed in the informal timber sector in Cameroon, against 13,000 in the more formal sector. And I would say that if you this is the timber sector, and this is a rough estimate because we concentrated only on the forested area. In more dry areas, you certainly have much more people, many more people being employed by the subsector. The demand for in urban markets, it's about 2 million cubic meters. And this is in terms of sound wood, because, you know, in the informal sector, the logs are processed on site, and usually you do not have process raw logs being transported, where the industrial supply is 168,000. In terms of prices, you have lower prices, like I already signaled before. And if you compare these two, and this is one of the reasons why the national markets tend to go informal, because of the price differences. Some of the challenges that we have are related to the legality, because almost all the sector, even if they have created what we call the community forestry management, the bulk, the most important part of the sector is illegal, working on illegality. But it is seen as legitimate, because we usually see that people in the rural area, especially, are selling the trees, which is illegal in most of the countries in Central Africa. But locally, the people who sell the tree don't think it's illegal. It's legitimate. It's their tree. They think it's their trees. The people, the village head, think also that the trees belong to the owner of the field, and only the government think that it is illegal. So there is a problem of legitimacy and illegality. Of course, that has a lot to do with unsustainability, because these big numbers of actors are difficult to monitor and to follow, because NGOs and international organizations try to focus mostly on big companies. Something is on big companies. It's not moving. Okay. So there are campaigns about illegality, unsustainability, but these campaigns really most of the time focus on industrial companies. And these industrial companies, mostly in Central Africa, do a lot of efforts to go to be certified or have management plans and whatever you may think of. But that's that's the wrong solution. The good solution will come from addressing the problem of smallholder, because the market is bigger there and it's going to grow. The export market for tropical timber from Central Africa is not foreseen to be growing in the next few decades. The growth will come rather from from the regional and domestic markets. This business is also very labor intensive and very difficult. But although it takes a lot of effort, but people are still doing it. So there is a need for some kind of organization. There is a need to for governments, for international organizations to focus and see how to improve and also be able to monitor what is being done there. In some countries, there are logging permits to allow the smallholders to operate safely, but usually these permits are either suspended because there are suspicions that there are illegality. In fact, there is illegality, but it's like in the civil services, the government is unable to implement its own law with the smallholders, and especially when you have a very centralized set of laws, which comes usually to the capital city, and people need to have timber at the local level. There are a few things that the government and the actors should try to do in order to improve, not impose the formalization or being more improve the governance settings of the subsector. Most of the informal sector is based on the customary ownership. So this has to be recognized in one way or the other to be able to address the sustainability of the informal sector. One other thing that may be tried is to promote legal demand. For instance, in most of the countries, we have this smallholder illegal wood, which is used by the public sector, like for building classrooms or whatever you may think of. There is no attempt to distinguish or to improve the procurement policies of the government at the local level or even at national level to favor the legal timber. Some other things to do is to support with control provision of transparent data and information. This is very difficult, but you can't do without it. There should be a way to, and maybe an organization like ITTO can help with that, to gather statistics, to develop methodologies on statistics to have accurate information on the sector. Because what we have done now is one-point study just to have the picture and draw attention that this is more important than overseas trade of timber products. But after that, you need a more systematic way of monitoring the domestic consumption and even the regional transformation, the regional trade. Facilitate microcredits, which means have access to the means in order to improve the business, and that would help also meet the requirements of sustainability. And there is a lot of ideas of good and bad. It's not a matter of criminalizing and finger pointing. It's a reality that we need to deal with. But the bigger challenge to me is to overcome the inability of governance to stimulate legal trade. Because especially in domestic countries, in domestic markets, but also in some cases, you may have opportunities to promote legality between countries of the same region. But even there, like from east of the Democratic Republic of Congo to the neighboring countries, you have all kinds of challenges, including political trouble and whatever. Then it's very difficult, and still the timber trade is still going on between these countries. So that's maybe the main challenge, is to see how the government can gain a bit more control on the sector. So that's what I had to present to you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That was absolutely fascinating. And coming from somebody who does a lot of market analysis, I was very happy to hear what you said about the need for good and complete data. And actually, ultimately, good policy relies on that. If you don't have the right data, you can come up with the wrong policy solutions. And the clear message there from some of the amazing figures you were coming out with regarding the scale of the internal trade in Africa compared with the external trade, I think that needs to inform policy development around sustainable forestry. So thank you for that, Richard. Now, I think I'm in probably the chairman's worst nightmare. We've got some online audio visuals. We're linking up with Germany. So I feel like somebody at NASA trying to talk through what's going on, but I think we are linking up with somebody in Germany. Is that right? Are they there? I know it's a bit later than we scheduled. Yes, good.
Can you hear me?
Ah, is that who is that?
Hello, this is Franz from GT Holz. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, we can. So I think I might let you introduce yourself. You are going to be talking. We're getting a trade perspective on the EU deforestation regulation. We have two speakers from the European Timber Trade Federation and GDO Holz, who are going to give us an overview of the EU deforestation regulation, and I think the actions that you have been taking in relation to that regulation, if that's correct. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you very much, Rupert. Yes, that's correct. So I'm going to present first about the actual implications of the EU deforestation regulation for producers and for importers. And then afterwards, my colleague Niels is going to talk about the actions that ITTF has taken in regards to the EUDR. Next slide, please. I am first going to shortly introduce myself. Then I will give a quick overview of the timeline of EUDR, which regulations are in place. Then I'm going to follow up with the obligations of importers, and then what kind of information the importers require from the producers. And in the end, I'm going to give a short overview of what happens if importers don't get the information that they need. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. I am working for the GT Holz Service Limited, and we are a subsidiary of the German Timber Trade Federation. And as German Timber Trade Federation, we are part of the European Timber Trade Federation. So that's why I was asked today to present here. We work as consultants for the EU timber regulation, in short EUTR. And at the moment, we are working with around 150 importers, mainly in Germany. Around half are members of the federation, and the other half is other importers of other timber-derived products, for example, paper, furniture, etc. We have our own due diligence system for the EUTR, and we are currently developing a new platform for the EUDR. At the moment, our system is paper-based. The new regulation is very complicated. That's why we want to move it into a digital online platform. Next slide, please. So first, one thing where there's a lot of confusion about is when EUDR actually comes into force and which rules are valid from which point. So at the moment, we are getting requests from stakeholders. Why don't you fight against EUDR? This is too complicated, etc. The simple answer is it's way too late because it's already in force since the 29th of June 2023. But we now have we are now in the middle of 18 months transition period, and the EUDR needs to be applied from the 30th of December 2024. And then from the 30th of December 2024, there's a 3-year period where both EUDR and EUTR apply in parallel based on the time of harvest. So if wood was harvested before the 29th of June 2023 and is then placed on the market after the 30th of December 2024, then the EUTR will apply for the next 3 years. But for wood that is harvested now in this transition period and then placed on the market after 30th of December 2024, the EUDR will apply. And then after 2027, there will be no more exemptions. The EUDR will apply for all products that are imported into the European Union and also all domestic production in the EU. Next slide, please. And this transition period is a big worry for us at the moment, because as I've mentioned, if I harvest wood now and then I place it on the market in 1.5 years, then the EUDR will apply. This means that exporters, producers need to start collecting information now, because if you now harvest your trees, then they are being processed, they're being stored, they're being dried, etc., and it takes some time. Then in 2 years, you will not be able to import this wood into the EU anymore if you do not have the necessary information. So please, that's a very important message from my side. In case products are being produced now and exported later after 30th of December 2024, this information is necessary. And then another important point is that the EUDR also applies for wood that is harvested after 29th of June and placed on the EU market before 30th of December 2024, in case it is then resold again after the implementation date. We are currently lobbying for an exemption for this topic, because in our opinion, it would be too complicated. Products that are now already in the market, where there's no information about geocoordinates, etc., would otherwise need new information in future to be sold on. We are currently waiting for information from the EU about this topic, but we have been promised that there will be some sort of transition period for this. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about what importers will have to do in the future in order to comply with EUDR. There's quite a lot of aspects to this. I'm mainly talking about the ones that are new, because I assume that EUTR is known by most exporters already. Next slide, please. So as we already know, a due diligence system needs to be applied before placing products on the market. This accounts for imports. It also accounts for European forest owners. So also a forest owner in Germany needs to apply a due diligence system before placing wood on the market in the future. We already have these due diligence systems, but at the moment, they are only accounting for legality. In future, we also need to look at deforestation and forest degradation. After due diligence has been done, after we have come to the conclusion that the wood is deforestation-free and legal, an importer needs to submit a due diligence statement to the EU's information system. So an online system where a certain set of information has to be entered, including geo-coordinates. If this information is not entered, then the importer cannot import the products, because customs will only release an import if there was a due diligence statement submitted. And also, the importers need to communicate information to customers down the supply chain, because also, depending on the size, some of their clients in the supply chain are liable for the correct implementation of EUDR. Next slide, please. Considering deforestation and forest degradation, importers must prove that their products don't come from any plots of land where there was deforestation or forest degradation after 31st of December 2020. So that's important. The cutoff date is 31st of December 2020. Whatever happened before is not relevant. But if there was deforestation or forest degradation after this date on this plot of land, then this wood is not deforestation free and cannot be placed on the market in the EU anymore. It doesn't matter what caused this deforestation or forest degradation. It's only the result, the land use change is important. What is deforestation? Deforestation in the regulation is defined as conversion of forest to agricultural land. That one is rather easy, and for forest products, usually not a problem. Forest degradation, however, will be quite complicated in my opinion. It's the conversion of primary forest or naturally regenerating forest to plantations or planted forest. That one could be very difficult to prove and to show that the product is degradation free. I've listed here a few ideas of possible evidence that a product is deforestation free. So for example, we could use satellite images, maybe official documents, certification like FSC or PEFC could be useful, or an importer could do his own audits in the area of production. Next slide, please. In addition to forest degradation and deforestation, we also need to look at legality. The aspects that I've mentioned here on this slide are already known, because that's what we already have to do under EUTR. These are land use rights, forest-related rules, environmental protection, trade and customs regulations, third parties' rights. Next slide, please. But what you see here in red are new points, and those are a bit worrisome to us. So we need, in future, we will also need to check tax regulations, labor rights, human rights, anti-corruption regulations, and indigenous peoples' rights, including the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. All of these topics, of course, are important. Our worry is we don't really know how to prove to our competent authorities that, for example, labor rights were not violated. We will need to find out what kind of documents, what kind of proof is necessary in order to show that a product was harvested legally in the terms of EUDR. Next slide, please. One important topic at the moment is FLEGT and CITES, because both of them are exempt of EUTR. This exemption now doesn't exist anymore in the new EUDR. FLEGT is mentioned though, but it only serves as evidence of legality. So for FLEGT certified wood from Indonesia and in future from Ghana, importers will still need to prove that there was no deforestation or forest degradation. And for CITES, CITES is not mentioned anymore in the regulation, so a complete due diligence system must be applied, and we need to check whether the wood was harvested legally and whether it's deforestation free. So next slide, please. This was now a short summary of what importers need to do. And in order to be able to do all of these things, the importers need a lot of information from producers. So in the next slide, I'm now going to show you what we need from producers in order to comply with EUDR. Next slide, please. The most important new feature of EUDR is that importers now need geocoordinates of all plots of land where the wood was harvested. For an area under 4 hectares, a single point is enough. But if the area is above 4 hectares, then a polygon is needed that describes the outline of the plot of land. And in case of several plots of land, for example, for composite products, plywood or particle board, etc., everything must be specified. So it's possible that you will not only have to submit 1 plot of land, but maybe 100 or 1,000, depending on the supply chain. And also for each of these plots, the regulation requires date or time range of harvest. So also this information needs to be supplied in future. And another topic that we already know is information about the product. So just like at the moment, we need scientific names for all the species that are contained in the product. And the genus is not enough. We need the complete scientific name. And if there's several different tree species contained, we need all of the scientific names. Next slide, please. Yeah, as we already know, we need evidence that the wood was harvested legally. And as mentioned before, for the new aspects that have now been added to the legality requirements of EUDR, we will need to find out what new evidence we need for it. And furthermore, we need evidence that the wood doesn't originate from a plot of land where there was deforestation or forest degradation. I've mentioned a few possible documents or information that can be used for that, like satellite images. One important part is that the EUDR, same as the EUTR, has different requirements depending on the risk of the country. So for example, if there's evidence of corruption in the forest sector or evidence of mixing of products along the supply chain, then we might need additional information and additional risk mitigation measures so that we can come to the conclusion that there's an eligible risk. Next slide, please. So now I've talked a lot about the requirements. To finish my presentation, I will show you a few of the consequences, what will happen if importers are not able to get this documentation or information, or if the information is not correct. Next slide, please. So as mentioned at the beginning, before being allowed to import, an importer needs to submit a due diligence statement. And one aspect of this statement are the geocoordinates. If I don't get geocoordinates, I cannot submit this due diligence statement and I cannot import my product. It's very simple. If I don't have the information, customs will not release my shipment. And another important aspect is that importers and their large clients are responsible for the legality of the imports. So by submitting this due diligence statement, I claim that my products are deforestation free and that they are legal. In case they're not, so either I have not made my work well or my supplier has given me wrong information, I can be sued by authorities. And so can my customers. So my customers are also liable that I, as an importer, do my work well and do my due diligence well. Next slide, please. And what is important here is that in the past, it was not really possible to verify most of the information that suppliers were giving. We had to believe them. Now, through satellite imagery and through the information that every importer has to enter in the information system for every shipment, the EU can verify whether information is plausible, whether it's correct. And for example, if a supplier gives wrong geocoordinates, then the EU can find out, for example, if 100 importers are using the same coordinates, if they're buying from the same supplier. And if false information is detected, this can cause serious problems for importers. The level of penalties is very high, the potential level. The maximum amount that is formulated in the regulation should be at least 4% of the turnover in the European Union. So if fines of this height are being given to a company, this could threaten the entire company. Furthermore, something that we already know, but is mentioned again, companies can be excluded from public procurement and the products can be seized. And one new aspect is a public blacklist of companies who violate the regulation. So there'll be a list available to everyone on the internet where companies that have violated EUDR in Europe are being presented. Next slide, please. And another important aspect here is that everyone who has information can submit a substantiated concern to the competent authorities. The authorities must investigate these concerns immediately. And then after the authorities have done their work, anyone with sufficient interest can challenge the decisions of these authorities in court. We think that this is very much two-sided. There might be actual cases of non-compliance where NGOs, for example, can really help and can show that importers or exporters are not complying with the law. On the other hand, we fear that some NGOs might use this in order to hinder imports, in order to cause problems. We will see what consequences it will have. And now I will come to my conclusion. Next slide, please. From what we've learned with 10 years of EUTR, illegal logging or deforestation are not really the problem. The challenge is rather to collect the correct information, to forward it to importers in the EU, and for them to document it correctly. Our experience is that companies don't fail their audits because they have illegally logged wood. They fail because they have not documented it properly or because some information is missing. So that's very important. Importers are very much reliant on getting the correct information. Otherwise, they will get immense problems with the competent authorities. And I've summed it up very short. If I don't have enough information, I cannot import into the EU. I've shown the consequences in the previous slides. And when I did these slides, I was thinking, okay, ITTO, big forestry companies in the tropics, for them, I think that they're prepared very well for this regulation because they already have GIS systems, they have the coordinates, they have documents that are proving every new aspect of the regulation, like labor rights, like FPIC, etc. And they have a lot of experience with EUTR. I think for them, it will not be problematic to comply with EUDR. It's rather a question of willingness. But we have heard a few presentations today about smallholders, and for them, I think it will be a real challenge to comply with EUDR, especially with long supply chains, a lot of data having to go through the entire supply chain. And with that, I'm done with my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Assuming Niels is, he hasn't spoken yet. Yeah, okay, we've got Niels coming next.
Thanks very much, Rupert. It's good. Even though I can't see any of you, I've had the pleasure of seeing your back on stage a little earlier. It's good to hear you, Rupert. Okay, my presentation is coming up. I can start with our introduction, perhaps quickly. Rupert and Franz has already given some words of introduction so far. Thanks for the presentation, by the way. My name is Niels. I'm working for the German Timber Trade Federation, and I'm going to present to you about the EUDR and actions we have taken as a German federation, both and as well as a member of the European Timber Trade Federation, which is called ITTO. First of all, thanks very much for having us. This is also for the account of Franz and me. It's an honor to speak here, even though I can't see any of you. That's a pity, but I hope you can at least hear us very well. Also, thanks for the organizers and, of course, ITTO in that respect, and not to forget all the other speakers. We've had a very nice input so far, so thanks for letting us participate in this and also hear the other presentations. As I said, Franz has already given you the, so to say, the insights of the practical implementation and some of our biggest worries and challenges that we're coming across when implementing it for the trade in Germany, but also on behalf of the ITTF in Europe. I'm going to speak about the actions that we've taken so far in terms of federational work and how we can improve that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So 2 sentences, very brief, about GD Holz and ITTF. GD Holz is an abbreviation for the German Timber Trade Federation, and we got around 800 member companies in Germany. We act as a trade federation and lobby federation, but we also work on topics such as import and export, foreign trade, give legal advice to our members in Germany. And what we're doing in Germany, of course, there's other equivalents in European countries in the EU 27. And there we have 12 members for ETTF in other European countries. I think in total it's 15 because there are some associated members in non-European states as well, which is mostly companies. So in total it's 12 to 15 members which we have in the EU. By the way, I'd really like to apologize for my very boring slides. I unfortunately do not have any pictures, no movies, no animations. I think that's just the effect of having to present very dry lobby work and things we are talking about the EUDR. I hope there's some content for you. Let's start with this. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? I'm going to structure my presentation with the following 4 aspects. First, I'm going to speak what we've done so far in Germany towards our members, basically our membership in Germany. Then what we've done with the partner federations in ETTF. Third aspect will cover what we've done towards and in the EU, that is both towards national member states, authorities and ministries, but also towards the European Commission. And a couple of points with supplier countries or towards supplier countries, as we think it is quite crucial to also spread the word about the new EUDR, new regulation to stakeholders outside the EU. Because as Franz also outlined already, they will, of course, also be affected. Next slide, please. So I think there's a couple of animations coming on this. What have we done with members in Germany? Click, please. We've done a couple of webinars. Click, please. A couple of webinars. Click, please. And some more webinars. And that is one of the most effective way, so to say, to spread the information. A regulation like this does not come easy. Of course, we're all very familiar with the EUTR, but the EUDR, as Franz mentioned, has quite some new aspects of it. And there's going to be an EU information system, like an online system as well, which is something new that hasn't been there before. And as Franz also has pointed out, there's a couple of new points, and getting this information in the market is crucial for us. And a very good way of doing so is through webinars. And I can tell you, I think Franz has held like 3 or so of them, or 4, both towards a group of people interested, so not just our members, but stakeholders being interested in it. Also other commodities such as pulp and paper, for example, and each of those webinars, they have had record-breaking numbers of attendees. So that gave us pretty much the feedback that there is need for information. Of course, we can only say and demonstrate what we know. And throughout the last couple of months, this knowledge developed slowly, but at the moment, we need to get the flow of information going in order to get it out and to consider stakeholders, of course. We have several newsletters in GD Host, but also in our European Umbrella Federation, ETTF. There's a regular exchange of information and exchange of views on transported via newsletters, which is another mean of communication about the EUDR. Then we have on-site trainings. France is for German members or those that wish to join the consultancy for EUDR. France is giving on-site trainings at individual companies or member companies, and explaining about the new challenges, and I'm pretty much sure other stakeholders in ITTF are doing the same on the ground towards their members or respective memberships. Then there's a regular exchange via the stakeholder consultation in Germany, and I can speak for some other European member states as well. Their respective ministries are informing trade federations, trade bodies, organizations on the news and developments. And in Germany, that's the BMEL together with the competent authority. I think we're now in the 6th or 7th stakeholder consultation in Germany, to which we are usually invited. And that establishes an okay flow of information. The ministry is exchanging and communicating about new developments which they have or can demonstrate from meetings that they had with the European Commission. Next slide, please. One more remark. I abbreviated ERP. That's Enterprise Resource Planning. We recently had an exchange with the German Ministry about this IT interface that is being planned for the EUDR. But for this IT interface, you need to know what systems are operating in member companies, in timber trading companies. So the ministry was basically asking us to give information about what ERP systems are being used on the ground in order to enable the European Commission to provide an IT solution that can also work, because there's interfaces possible to the systems that are being used by the trade. So that was a very good feedback from one of those stakeholder consultations that we are actually being asked for information in order to make things work in the future. This slide leads me to our European partners and partners in the European Timber Trade Federation. As ITTF, as a trade body, trade organization, trade umbrella organization, we have applied for 2 seats in the European Commission focus groups. And if I'm not mistaken, they're called Traceability and Focus Group on Smallholder Inclusion. Franz is nodding. Thanks for the feedback. And this will provide very good information from those focus groups, which we then aim to disseminate among our members in Europe. We have established a working group on EUDR, which comprises 6 member federations. France is in there, Denmark is in there, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, and us ourselves as GDHOS, so Germany. And we did that to basically have a common approach and get insights from other ministries in the European member states, or those 6 respective member states. And that has proven to be a very good work on the ground. We've seen we need to communicate more, and we need to communicate better, not just towards our members, but also among one another to basically learn from one another, because we're all facing the same challenge in this. And as a first result of this working group on EUDR, we drafted a supplier letter, which is both aimed at providers of raw material in Europe, because they will equally be covered by the EUDR, just as well as log suppliers or timber suppliers in the tropics, or in Brazil, or in China, or whatever. So we drafted a supplier letter in, I think, seven different languages in order to achieve a wide covering first information of the main differences from EUDR to the EUTR. And that is all on one page, and then it goes more into detail on the 3 consecutive pages. And this is a first information, basically, to tell international suppliers, but also EU suppliers, what's coming. We are planning to draft a second letter whenever there's new information out. So at the moment we can't really say or report much news, and yeah, but it's this first supplier letter has shown to be quite valuable, even though it stirred up the market a bit, I have to say. Which again is good, because that tells us there was little to no information available. So we have the goal achieved. Especially the supplier letter was aiming at a point which Franz already mentioned as well, for timber that is already being harvested now or after the 30th of June this year. And that has a long processing period. May that be the technical processing or drying of thick dimension lumber or timber, and then only comes into the enters the market long after the EUDR will already be enforced. So say middle of 25 or something like that. And Franz has explained the details about this, because for those materials entering the market long after implementation has passed, you will need geolocation or geo coordinates, and if you don't have them, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to put these products on the market. So communication is crucial, but not just with our sector, but also with other commodities or stakeholders in other commodities, such as coffee and soy, rubber, palm oil, and the like, because they're equally concerned. And this communication has shown that the timber sector has got some pretty decent knowledge already based on the EUTR. But of course, we can learn from the other commodities, but especially as many of those are way more industrial, so to say, or industrially organized as the small-scale timber trade. Next slide, please. So that was a brief overview of what we're doing in the ETTF. Now I'm going to point 3 of my presentation. What did we do towards the EU? And of course, many of those aspects are quite close to one another. I briefly touched on this already with the supplier letter for timber that's already that will be placed on the EU market after 2024. The EUDR will apply. So this is basically what our supplier letter was covering. Next slide, please. Collection of information for such supplies is already necessary, and that already also leads me to the point that we need a longer transition period for products that are somewhere in between the two regulations. If it is an EUTR thing only, that's quite clear. If it is at the later stage only covered by EUDR, then what needs to be provided as well is quite clear too. But for timber, that is somewhere in between, which regulation is going to cover and what challenges need to be overcome. Whenever these questions aren't quite clear, then we need a longer transition period for those products in between, and that is one thing we're trying to achieve until the end of next year. Next slide, please. Franz pointed it out. There's going to be a public blacklist of companies that have violated the regulation, and that is one of our very big concerns, because one of the main aims of the EUDR when the Commission and after the trilogue was implementing the EUDR was a more harmonized approach and a level playing field for all companies that are being concerned, for example. And with the public blacklist, and also with the second bullet point of substantiated concerns, and anyone with sufficient interest can challenge decisions by authorities, we have the fear that this public that there's quite a severe level of public scrutiny, which basically is good, but it can also lead to a very unfair market situation in differing from one member state to the other. We all know that companies that might make use of substantiated concerns or make use of the public blacklist might be way more active in one member state than they are in another. So basically, there is a harmonized approach for implementing the new EUDR, but we fear that through the blacklist and substantiated concerns and the consequence of authorities having to investigate immediately, this harmonized approach might be somewhat skewed between the member states, because NGOs, for example, are more active in one member state than they are in another. So that for us is a fear, and we're trying to to lobby towards some more reasonable, so to say, implementation of these aspects. Next slide, please. That one, thanks very much. That harmonized implementation I mentioned already. At the moment, and France is also very involved in this, we are delivering examples of import cases to demonstrate what is happening on the ground. We had the impression, especially at the very early talks, that the European Commission was not very much aware of how complex supply chains are in different commodities. So we're trying to demonstrate knowledge of those complex supply chains and where the main challenges are arising. In the future, we think that the most effective way of influencing the implementation of the EUDR will be through the FAQs and the guidance document, which in turn can be the only way to make the EUDR feasible, as that is one of the main criteria. It must be feasible or applicable. But if there's two complex supply chains that don't have a feasible approach or a feasible solution, so to say, then basically those supply chains will be eradicated from a sensitive market, which basically you don't want. Next slide, please. Another aspect is that there is no exemption for wood covered by a FLEGT or CITES or interim certification. We see a lot of benefits from especially the FLEGT process and also benefits of certification. That's needless to say. But CITES actually as an internationally and widely recognized mechanism of endangered species, protecting endangered species. So why should there not be how do you say, why should it not be made easier for products that are being covered by either of the three mechanisms to fulfill the EUDR? We are definitely not calling for a green lane or something like that, as was the case in the EUDR, but facilitation for FLEGT timber, for example, as legality aspects will be covered in the supply country, should definitely play their role in the implementation of the EUDR. We see low standard and high risk countries, or the European Commission is going to rank supplier countries both in the EU and abroad to a low standard and high risk, and the result of that will be differing standards in fulfilling due diligence, which means we are working on communicating that supplier countries must do their best to get from a standard risk to a low, ideally, and it needs to be avoided that we have a lot of high-risk supplier countries, both in the EU and also abroad. The supplier letter I've mentioned already. Next slide, please. Which leads me to the conclusion. Franz pointed it out, the timber sector, no one is prepared better than the timber sector. The way we see it is that currently no sector is prepared well. That is a bit of a radical thing to say, but I think there needs to be way more information and communication between all the stakeholders that are being involved, and us as a federation in Germany, but also with the ITTO partners, we're trying to get some leverage in this. We think that it'll be extremely difficult for many of the supplier countries to comply, which of course is the same situation, the same background for EU importers and small and medium-sized non-SMEs, along the supply chain. To end on a positive note, we're quite happy that the flow of information has started, and we're working on to get that going. Thanks very much. Oh yeah, and the plea to please inform your network.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you, Franz. That was, yes, what I would call a very sobering description of what's involved, of the content of the EUDR. It's obviously a fait accompli. The law is in place. Everybody should be gathering data now, and you won't be able to do business in the EU from the start of next year, from the start of 2025, unless you've provided that data. It's the operators, of course, in the EU that are very much on the hook with this. There are very serious liabilities for importers into the EU. And actually, obviously, it should also be pointed out, exporters out of the EU. So manufacturers in the EU are exporting product and they are not supplying their geolocation data at point of export. That is also illegal trade, and that needs to be emphasized. So European manufacturers also have to accommodate this in order to continue to be able to export legally into the global market. And that's something that's often not mentioned. It is quite important. And of course, it does cover, I heard the sort of reassuring tones to the effect that the timber industry is better prepared than other sectors. To some extent, that's true. Certainly, the other commodity sectors are very much more fragmented. They're larger. They have not had the experience of the EUTR, but this is, I think, a very different beast from the EU timber regulation, particularly the requirements for geolocation, which can impact quite heavily, we think, from what we're hearing on small holders. So that's the background there. I think we now have about half an hour for questions on this issue, but not only this issue. I have to emphasize we've heard a lot of presentations today. The EU is, of course, it's an important market, but it is only one market. There are other countries implementing similar regulations, but we've also heard a lot about the longer-term opportunities and challenges of dealing with this huge increase in demand, which we will see in tropical countries in the future from the construction sector and a lot of the issues surrounding that. So with that, I shall just open the floor to questions. Thank you. Ghana, please.
Thank you, Mr. Coordinator. My first question goes to Mr. Isoda. In fact, his presentation was very wonderful on the mass timber building. Indeed, mass timber is the future. However, since wood is highly combustible, addressing fire resistance is crucial, especially our part of the world. No wonder from your presentation, mass timber building is not popular in Africa. And it is a concern in my country. The building industry always asks this question: how can we use wood to build since it's highly combustible? Is there a way of treating the wood or this timber to make it fire resistant? That's the first question. My second question goes to Mr. France. In fact, his presentation on this EUDR got me scared. Is it another way of controlling governance in producing countries or these tropical countries? For instance, if a government invests so much to wait forests and degraded forests, which was degraded as a result of bushfires, not logging, are you implying that products from such degraded forests cannot be exported to Europe? Would you also advise, since flex is not a guarantee to place wood in the timber market, would you then advise countries to still continue the flex processes? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think, should we deal with each question as it comes? I think there's one question there very specifically about the way of treating mass timber so it can be used in tropical countries, obviously a big issue. Is that something you could comment on, Nobutaka? Thank you.
Thank you for question. I'm not familiar with the Ghana condition, but I think that if you want to use mass timber products in Ghana, I think that the first maybe you have to import some mass timber products from the overseas countries and then use in your country first, I think. But after that, you want to use your domestic timber for your domestic market. So
Excuse me, I think maybe you didn't get a question.
Okay.
Well, we are worried about fires. Fire. As I
Fire.
said, timber is highly combustible.
Yep.
So how do we protect this mass timber from
Okay.
fires?
Okay. Thank you. I confused. I'm sorry. For the fire, there is many countries has their own regulation for fire protection, and usually we have to covered with combustible materials, and then you can use timber. But as I mentioned, timber is combustible material, but still the burning speed is very slow. So if you have maybe special treatment, you can use the timber with no incombustible materials for the timber buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We'll obviously take the second question now. I would quite like, I think, Niels and France to give a trade perspective. Obviously, you've been involved with FLEGT licensing for many years, and it would be interesting to know if your view is that given this new regulation, which doesn't provide a guarantee of deforestation free at this stage, whether from your perspective as trade associations, you see there's a role for FLEGT licensing for countries like Ghana, which of course, the latest news, it does look like it will proceed to licensing fairly soon, from what I understand.
All right, thank you. I will first comment on the first question, the rather technical question, then Niels can later talk about the political point. In terms of forest degradation, so the example was we have a bushfire and then afterwards you do reforestation. The problem is that the definitions in the regulation are quite complicated. So first you have the definitions of different forest types. You have primary forest, you have naturally regenerating forest, you have planted forest, and then you have plantation. And the last one is other wooded land. And the regulation is not very flexible as in what you're allowed to do. So degradation is defined as the transformation of naturally primary forest or naturally regenerating forest to planted forest or plantation. So in the end, no matter where the land use change came from, if there was a bushfire and then afterwards the area has the characteristics of a plantation, then it was forest degradation in terms of the regulation. This is a problem. I don't think it will occur very often, but we do have these problems around the world, also in Europe. And we hope that there'll be a sensible approach to this. Me personally, having 10 years of experience with EUTR, I think that our authorities will not really be flexible with this, and they will just interpret the regulation word by word, which means that in some extreme cases, after bushfire, if you have a plantation afterwards, it might be not compliant with the UDR. And now I'll hand over to Niels for the FLEGT question.
Thanks very much, Franz, and also to the gentleman asking the question. Some 6 weeks ago or so, I met with a delegation from Ghana in Brussels, and I think that delegation was also there to discuss current issues and the way forward regarding the FLEGT licensing scheme in Ghana and its recognition from an EU side. And pretty much the same question came up, and we've had a bit of a discussion around this, but I've tried in that meeting also to make my point very clear regarding the question whether FLEGT process should be continued or not. I can only see yes, it should be continued, and working on the process and its implementation on the ground in the supplier countries. I think we now have like 14 or 16 or so worldwide being in the process. I'm strongly lobbying or advocating for a continuation of this process, because what we've seen in terms of changing on the ground and new systems being implemented, monitoring timber supply and legality aspects and sustainability criteria and things like that. That is such a massive advancement in terms of monitoring the goods of our forests and of the forests in the supplier countries. It in the end, it does not only come down to whether you have a system that's being acknowledged by your partner and you have a means to enter a market on a legal way. It also comes down to protecting, restoring, and further using our forests, not only to a consumer point or consumer benefit, but also to a producer benefit. So my point on this is very clear. Yes, the FLEGT process should continue, even more so, as my personal opinion is that there will be some kind of recognition also in the EUDR. May it only be legality aspects being covered, but if you closely look at what changes FLEGT does on the ground, it will definitely be more than that. Saying sustainability criteria will also be met in very general terms, and other aspects as well. So I think the FLEGT process should be continued with all effort possible.
Thanks for those answers. I think very clear. And we've got another. Yes, I think Vietnam, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the speakers, the presenters, for very specific and very clear presentation they have delivered. I would like to draw your attention to the interlinkage or relations between VPA FLEGT and EUDR. Now with EUDR in place, people, are less focused on VPA FLEGT. Vietnam is one of the countries which have spent so much resources and energy to conclude VPA FLEGT with European Union. And we are now proactively preparing to get readiness to implement in full scale VPA FLEGT with EU FLEGT licensing. And now with the EUDR in place, people, give less attention to VPA FLEGT, assuming that EUDR is more important and more dominating. So I would like you to pay more attention to VPA FLEGT and give priorities and privilege to those countries which have tried to conclude VPA FLEGT with European Union and which are actively preparing for VPA FLEGT implementation. Another thing is the supply chain of wooden product is very complicated. In Vietnam, for instance, we are using locally sourced acacia or rubber timber to produce furniture for export to the European Union market. We are also using a lot of timber imported from over 100 countries in the world to produce maybe some furniture or wooden product for export to European Union. For instance, we may import pine from Chile, eucalyptus from Brazil, and etc. And how can we get the geo-coordinate evidences to prove deforestation free. That is another problem. For acacia grown in Vietnam, maybe no problem. But for the timber we are importing from various destinations, it may be too much complicated and too much costly. Another thing is that for intelligent people, no problem to collect geo-coordinate evidences using Google or using other facilities to get evidences of the location of the plot of plant and even of the polygon. But for a farmer who is located in upland area and who may be ethnic minority or who even cannot write, cannot read, how can he collect geo-coordinate and other evidences to prove that the acacia timber he is selling to other people is grown on the deforestation or degradation forest-free plot of plant. And with EUDR, we almost have no time for preparation, for getting readiness. With the VBA factory, it takes quite a long time, for preparation, for getting readiness. But with EUDR, almost no time. And how people can be prepared to comply. That is what I would like to discuss with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. There were a lot of questions in there that I'm not sure anybody on this panel is qualified to answer, particularly with regard to the policy relationship between the VPAs and the new EUDR. I wonder if the EU would be willing to comment on some of those questions raised at this stage. No comment at this stage. So the response to that, I will then pass over to, I will see if Niels or Frans can make some observations from the European trade side. Certainly, I think the people I've been speaking to in the trade are very startled by the timescales for implementation. What can be done through the trade and through perhaps working through the multi-stakeholder platforms to make it clear that these timescales are extremely difficult. And you're right, you pointed out that for large companies, large industrial operators in the tropics, it will be relatively simple to comply, I'm sure. But it's the small operators, it's the complex supply chains in Southeast Asia, where there will be very significant issues to be dealt with. What can be done through trade channels to facilitate that?
Thank you. I share the worries of the speaker from Vietnam. We are very much worried about smallholders, and the example with a smallholder who is not able to read, who doesn't have technical capabilities to record his own geocoordinates. We share these worries, and we ourselves don't have a solution for it. So there are initiatives from the EU side to have initiatives to work together with smallholders. I am personally not really aware of the different projects, but there is something called the Team Europe initiative, where, as far as I know, there are different projects with smallholders. And I think that it's important, for example, for federations also in the producing countries, for industries to work together with their suppliers, for them to enable them to do this. In general, the topic of geocoordinates for domestic production, I think, is not that complicated, because you only need to collect the geocoordinates once. So if you're a trader and you have 100 smallholder farmers as suppliers, you go there once, you pick the geocoordinates, you assign it to the name, and then you will have this data. Of course, it's a big effort at one point, but after you got this data, you can use it. The other issue is with getting data from other countries. That one, we also share this worry that it will be difficult to get geocoordinates from other third countries through long supply chains. In the end, it will be very simple. If you have geocoordinates, you can export this product to the EU. If you don't have the coordinates, you can't. It's from our point of view, it's the same. If we as importers can get those coordinates, we will import this product. If the rest of the criteria are okay, if we don't get the geocoordinates, we can't import it. So I suggest you speak to your suppliers in other countries as soon as possible to inform them about these requirements. We have done the same, as Niels mentioned. We have sent out supplier letters. Please inform everyone about the new requirements. And that's our only chance we have to get this information. One more point I would like to add for the topic of FLEGT. In my opinion, FLEGT covers a big portion of the EUDR because all of the legality requirements are covered by FLEGT. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest amount of work for the importer. In addition, you have the geocoordinates that you need to collect, and then you need to use these coordinates to check whether there was deforestation or forest degradation. But that one, in my opinion, is far less work than checking whether labor regulations or indigenous people's rights, etc., were upheld. So, in my opinion, nobody who is in the FLEGT process should forget that FLEGT will really help them with UDR and really will reduce the burden and the amount of documentation that needs to be provided to the EU in future. I don't know whether anyone has any other points, maybe Niels.
Well, basically, I can only second what you said about the importance of FLEGT in the future. I hope and we're really working on having the biggest amount of recognition in the EUDR that the regulation can provide for FLEGT timber. Perhaps one more sentence towards the gentleman from Vietnam, and Franz, you also already mentioned that we are sharing the concerns. If you look at the forest ownership in Germany, for example, it is extremely scattered just as well. I mean, we have like 46 or 48% of the owners of forests in Germany owning less than 20, Franz, please correct me if I'm wrong, 20 or 15 hectares or so. So it's like millions of forest owners owning a hectare or 2 hectares somewhere. And in many cases, they don't even know where their hectares are, where their forests are situated. So we are basically having the exact same issue, and I know for sure that that's the same in many other European countries as well. So it's not just getting geo-coordination and precise data of the supply chain is not just an issue that countries outside the EU are facing. We are having the exact same issues, and I know the sawmillers in Germany are quite worried about the fact that their suppliers are coming from a multiple range of locations. So it's a thing we need to work on, and again, it needs very good, very precise, and very robust communication from the European Commission and also from ministries. And one thing we also need, as fast as possible and as precise as possible, is a precise FAQ or precise guidance document that was also shown in the EUDR, because so many questions remained open when companies on the ground already had to deal with the regulation. And that's exactly the same with the EUDR. There's even more practical implementation questions open, and we need answers to that. Otherwise, we are achieving the opposite of what we want to. We're not going to protect the forest by importing reasonable products or by producing them and then trading them, but we are distorting our trade flows to other less sensitive markets, and that is exactly what must not happen in the future.
For that. Yeah, quickly move on. We've got quite a limited amount of time for questions. So please, I think the UNFF had a question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions have been raised and addressed. Thank you.
Oh, the IWPA, I think you had a question, please. Thank you.
I did. Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. This was, I think, a very thought-provoking panel. So I've got 2 questions and one sort of general observation. Just as a little bit of background, ITTO represents a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, more than 80% of our members, and I think it's probably fairly representative of the industry that we work within, our smaller, medium-sized enterprises. And I personally am incredibly proud of the work that we have done as an association, and I think as a global industry, to ensure that those small and medium-sized enterprises are considered when policymaking occurs, particularly when you're looking at, ensuring that indigenous communities or community-based forestry has a voice in the policy that we make. Rupert, you mentioned the serious economic headwinds that we're facing. You have consumers that are incredibly price conscious, even more than they were a few years ago. And so I'm curious, specifically for our two panelists that are here to talk about the EUDR, but I think more even as a general question, are you aware of any studies that have been done or any economic analyses that have been performed that look at what the impact will be to consumers as a result of EUDR, whether it's, by product, whether it's overall? And then sort of a second question in that same vein, are you aware of any economic analyses that have been done about the impact that this will have on small and medium-sized enterprises? Not just the the things like technology, right? But you have folks that maybe are not literate. They don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have access to some of the requirements that will be needed in order to comply with EUDR. So I'd be very interested if there's been, any of that very granular look at what the actual costs will be to the consumers as well as to the producers. And then sort of a general observation, I'm increasingly concerned, and I think the gentleman from Peru spoke very eloquently on this, that there are consumers and members of the general public that view any tree being cut down as terrible, right? They don't understand that we are committed to ensuring that forests continue standing as forests and that communities value them as standing forests. And so you have consumers that have moved away from using wood products on one hand. And then on the other hand, you have what will likely be, economic impacts of EUDR, for example, in increased prices overall throughout the supply chain. And so I'm very concerned that we are seeing wood and wood products being squeezed from these two ends. And as we look ahead, to the panelists that talked about wood as a building material, there are a lot of opportunities out there to be able to use wood in new and innovative ways or to increase market share on things that we're already doing. And I'm worried that those opportunities will be decreased or disappear if you have both higher costs and a concern about the PR of using wood. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very, very good questions. On the economic analyses, I can't say that I know personally of any economic analyses other than the fitness check that was done by the European Commission itself. But that didn't go into a great deal of detail, I don't think, on the likely consumer impacts on consumer costs, except actually rather to indicate that the costs were believed to be quite low. But I'm not sure how much scrutiny there was of that impact assessment itself and how much the supply chain was really consulted on the underlying impacts. But perhaps, Niels, you might have some comments. I can see you sitting forward looking like you want to say something, which is a relief. Thank you.
I'm glad you could see me, Rupert. No, that is exactly true. I think what was done there in the past by the European Commission was not profound enough or in depth enough at all. The question was also on the product range. I truly believe that some of the products we have in the timber trade, they are forced to disappear, unfortunately, because the supply chain is just way too complex. Or maybe I can correct myself and say disappear in the European market. A complex supply chain is not necessarily a bad supply chain or somebody obscure being in the supply chain that does not want to deliver data that is required. That is not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying that the processing of the timber through different stakeholders in a mill, for example, is just too complex in order to provide the data that is needed all the way down to the importer. Regarding prices and costs to consumers, I can give you one number in a minute to give you just a slight idea of what's the implication of our intention to produce a due diligence system for the EUDR. France has been in touch with several let's call them IT suppliers, IT service providers that could help us produce an IT-based due diligence system. And the costs for having such a system, which more or less fulfills all the requirements that you need to demonstrate, are ranking between 300 and 400,000 euros. For the mere development, and then you have costs of running, costs of actualizing, updating, and things like that. And that can only be done by federations and bigger stakeholders. For example, if you're talking about an SME or the small scale timber trader that happens to be an operator as well, they simply can't afford to have a system like that. And equally, they can't afford to have 2 more staff members to only check robust documents and keep track of geolocalization. So this is a tremendous task for us and an extremely costly and difficult one for the future. And yes, I also second the very short implementation phase we've had, and also the late consultation of the timber sector in this. I'm not so sure what other commodities say about this, but we only got to know the fact that there's going to be a new regulation at a very late stage, which regrettably was the case. So. In short, I'm afraid some products are forced to disappear. Prices might slightly go up for the end consumer, which is a pity because it's the only renewable and sustainable material that we have for so many purposes, as you all know. And I think the European Commission is planning an impact assessment 2 years or 3 years or at some stage after the full implementation of the UDR. So in the future, there will be an impact assessment on the effects of it. And to that, I'm very much looking forward, as you might also be, Rupert.
Yes, always looking forward to more data. Yes, I think you've been waiting very patiently. Australia, please.
Thank you, Rupert. We just have a couple of quick reactions to the issues we've heard rather than specific questions, if you'll allow. So firstly, thank you to all the presenters. And as this is our first time taking the floor, let us extend that to our Thai hosts. Firstly, on deforestation-free supply chains, we'd like to thank the United States for sharing their findings of their report on combating international deforestation associated with agricultural commodity production developed under executive order. We were appreciative of the opportunity to afford it to all stakeholders to respond to extensive and well-articulated questions that didn't prejudice any one approach ahead of any decisions being taken. For us, it's a good model of an inclusive approach. And many in the room will recall that a little over a decade ago, Australia and others in the room began introducing the first legal logging trade measures. It's only been through strong cooperation in fora that we've managed to build trust and acceptance of these approaches and see many others follow with their own approaches. And we believe the same cooperation is needed here on these issues. And secondly, and briefly, we'd like to thank the presenters for drawing attention to the supply and demand challenges and opportunities for wood that we will collectively face in a world where fiber's role as a sustainable solution is ever more important. Australia feels that this issue is greatly underappreciated in many circles that look at forests through a narrow lens, similar to the concerns raised by the IWPA. So this needs to be rectified, together with fostering a renewed appreciation of the concept of sustainable forest management as a holistic approach to delivering on many forest outcomes. And this can only be achieved, however, through more regular and authoritative data and engagement to guide decision-making and change perspectives in broader circles. So Australia welcomes international actions and cooperation to address this and appreciates the ongoing efforts of the ITTO and FAO to these ends over many years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's much appreciated, particularly as it saves me summarizing a lot of our meeting. Thank you very much. I think we've got time for just one more. And I think, Ghana, again, you had your flag up. Just enough time for one.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. and thanks to the presenters for the wonderful insight and information shared with us in this session. I have few comments and then questions that are a bit interrelated here. I do appreciate the fact that from the question that my colleague asked from Ghana regarding whether or not the VPAs are still relevant, for which you said, yes, it is still relevant. We do appreciate that. But we still have a problem with this. Ghana is just at the brink of issuing the second FLEC license come next year, early next year, and for that matter, the first FLEC license from Africa. We thought we could celebrate it, but EUDR, I mean, as you have already pointed out well, does not even give exemption to FLEC license. It doesn't give exemption to CITES. It doesn't give exemption to certification. And I do recall that when we came on board with this FLEC license business, so to speak, we were told that when you look at certification, there were some synergies between FLEC license and certification. And I know some countries have even done some study to look at what they can do to bring FLEX to the level of certification. But here is the case. EUTR is exiting. I do appreciate the fact that perhaps EU ran out of patience from EUTR, I think 2015 or so, almost 8 years now, and still only one license in the market. I do appreciate that. But of course, we also have a little bit of frustration from our end because we thought it was just going to be a simple thing to handle. But once we started with the negotiation and the signing of the VPA, we realized that it involved a lot. And I know you are very much aware with the Ghana system. I mean, it entails a lot. I mean, a lot of reforms. It's not only about legality, but it's also about sustainable management of the forest. But unfortunately, EU has not done a lot to market the aspects of the reforms that we did. That brings on board lots of issues bordering on sustainable forest management. But it is looked more as just legality, which I think is not right. It's not right. But here is the case. You are now bringing on board EUDR and relegating EUTR. Why will I be happy? I cannot even celebrate when I even issue FLEC license. No point for celebration, because we are actually looking at how we can even get to the level of certification because of the synergies. Now it's not even exempted. So where is the point for us to celebrate? Nothing of that sort. However, you also mentioned that there's going to be determination of risk factor. What are the benchmarks in determining risk factor from low, medium to high? Who is going to do that? By whose law? Is it going to be national law or the EU law? That is another thing that we have to look at. I do also appreciate the presentation made by Dr. Linda and then I think someone else regarding the potentials in terms of looking at the shortfall of timber supply from the tropics. Plantation is definitely going to be the answer, not the natural forest. But we are also aware that where do we have the lands? The lands are limited to be able to meet the demand for timber supply in future from the tropics. So what does it mean? We now have to go back into the natural forests that are highly degraded. And that is where we are going to do the planting. But EUDR also tells me that, no, it is conversion. It's conversion. So where do we have the safe route to escape to? It looks like there's no escape route, which is safe, given EUDR. But what is even surprising to me and to some of my colleagues is that extractive industry is one of the major cause of deforestation. But EU has been very silent when it comes to the extractive industry. who are the multinationals behind the extractive industry? Why didn't they include extractive industry in the EUDR? Then we know that this field is now, I mean, we are now trying to make sure that at least there is equality. The field is been fair for everyone to come to play, but not one rule for this person, another rule for another person. I think, in all fairness, it looks like the goalpost is being shifted. Anytime we try to do and better our lot, they shift the goalpost. It's not fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think actually that's a good point at which I will invite, yes. At that point, I will invite Barney Chan, I think, to come and give his, I've been told, what is it, Barney? Sorry, I apologize. Please, the European Commission, please.
Thank you very much. I will not take so much of your time because I don't want to enter into detailed discussion on this. First, let me remind that all of us here, all our countries here, committed to halt deforestation by 2020. It's an international commitment which was shared by all our masters, political masters, and the EU doing this regulation is complying with its international commitments. So I would like first to remind that it's an environmental measures with the objective to stop deforestation. Then, of course, we hear some of your concerns here. I already replied to some concerns about the smallholders. Actually, this argument is also used sometimes by the public authorities of some countries or by big companies. But when we have discussions with the smallholders, usually they are rather positive. Again, I refer to the discussions we had in the last multi-stakeholders platform in Brussels, and all of them see an interest and benefits to these proposals. So I think we should not overuse these arguments of the smallholders being outside of the business. Actually, it will also give them more transparency, and maybe it's also a problem not only for the smallholders, but for the bigger or for the middlemen persons which are in this supply chain. When it comes to the FLEGT, I will not go too much into detail. Actually, I heard the argument that it would be useful by these people from Brussels, France, and Niels. I think we should not stick to a so simple comment on that. The FLEGT negotiations were ongoing with many different partners, and the level of discussion was very different. For some, we are very close to reach the license stage, where for others, we know that we would still have need some years before to reach that stage. So the fact to say we should go on with these FLEGT negotiations, I think it's not appropriate for all countries. It may be the case for some of them, but probably not for some others. Also because it covers more products, and also because FLEGT is not sufficient as such to put the products on the green lane. So on this, I think it merits a more complex and a more detailed discussion. Just, of course, I heard the need for more documentation for guidance document, and the EU is, of course, very ready to provide these documents. We already worked on question and answers documents, which are revised very regularly to be updated. They are, of course, publicly available. The same for some guidance document, and we will certainly continue to produce some to reply the concerns of our trade partners, also the private sector. And there will be an impact assessment. Actually, we already run some impact assessment in some countries. We did it here in the region to identify what would be the impact, also to better target our support. So we are not against this impact assessment. We did it in Thailand. We are doing it, I think we did it in Laos. We are doing it in Malaysia. And actually, the conclusions we had for some of them are quite positive. So sometimes we overestimate the problems. I would just take the example of Thailand because I know that one a bit better, of course. But it shows that, for instance, of course, it's not timber specifically because Thailand is much more concerned by rubber than by timber. More than 99% of the products which are covered by this regulation and which are exported to Europe are not timber precisely, they are rubber and a few other products. But actually, this impact assessment shows that the Thai authorities are already very well prepared. And I think it's also the case for many countries for timber, where geolocation is already an issue which has been treated in the past because of the EU TR. So it will help these countries. So I think we should not overestimate the problems. We know that there will be some to be faced by the private sectors and by the authorities. But I think, well, with the cooperation from the EU, I think it's perfectly manageable. As it was also mentioned at the beginning of the intervention, it's too late to change the legislation. It has been published. It is into force. It will enter in application in a few months. We're now in a bit more than a year, 13 months. So we should all work together and focus on the support which is needed to make sure that the trade is not disturbed, and that we can comply with this regulation in a smooth way, be it for the EU operators or for the producing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that input from the European Commission. I think we do now, I'm afraid we do have to close this session, but we do need to bring Barney up to the front to read the trade statement before we close the session. And I hand over the chair. So thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure chairing this discussion with you. And we look forward to having further discussions on these very important issues. Thank you.
Rupert, I'll do it down here, Rupert.
Oh, you do there.
Please, Barney.
As usual, I will read out the trade statement, which was prepared by members of the Trade Advisory Group. Copies will be circulated. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, our trade statement focuses on the EU regulations 2023/1115 of the European Parliament and of the Council, or EUDR for short. This regulation will have a significant impact on the tropical timber trade in EU, and it also has serious implications in tropical timber producing countries. The principle behind the EUDR is one that the tropical timber trade supports. Deforestation is anathema to an industry built on sustainable use of tropical forests. TEC welcomes the acknowledgement in the preamble to EUDR that the major driver of deforestation is not demand for wood products, but that, in the words of the EU, agricultural expansion drives 90% of global deforestation. However, TEC is deeply concerned that the law fails to acknowledge, either explicitly in the text or by implications in the measures it imposes, that the sustainable production and consumption of timber products promotes forest conservation and mitigates climate change. Timber is the only commodity within the scope of the EUDR for which an increase in demand can enhance the value of forests, actively discourage deforestation, and promote increased investment in sustainable forest management, as well as help address climate change. And as stated in the ministerial call on sustainable wood issued at the 15th World Forestry Congress, which was held in Seoul in May this year, scaling up bioeconomies by using sustainable wood, replacing carbon-intensive materials, has high potential to become a cost-effective and innovative contribution at scale to achieve carbon neutrality and build more resilient economies. In light of this, there is significant responsibility on the part of the EU and the architects of similar regulations in other consumer markets to ensure that laws developed with the best of intentions to help reduce deforestation do not inadvertently increase barriers to trade in illegally sourced wood products, as such regulations are more likely to undermine than enhance the value of standing forests. TEC is somewhat reassured that the definition of deforestation and degradation in the EUDR do, by implication, recognizes the continuing role of selection harvesting in natural tropical forests. However, TEC believes that some aspects of the EUDR have potential to create unnecessary barriers to the sustainable development of tropical forest resources and trade in tropical timber products. First, the regulation does not differentiate between illegal deforestation and legal forest conversion, thereby undermining the ability of tropical forest countries to make their own rational decisions as to the appropriate balance between forest land and agricultural land within their own borders. The regulation seems to conflict with the Charter of the United Nations and the principle of international law, as referenced in our ITTA, that the state have the sovereign right to exploit their own resources pursuant to their own environmental policies. Second, the lack of adequate consultation with trade partners before the regulations was passed, and the continuing apparent unwillingness of the EU to engage in dialogue on the regulations through a multilateral organizations like the ITTO. TEC decided to focus its trade statement on the EUDR only after we learned that there would be no separate agenda item on EUDR during this council meeting. TEC believes this lack of dialogue has been a major factor contributing both to the inclusion of inappropriate technical requirements in the EUDR and to unfortunate misunderstandings surrounding the scope and objectives of the regulation. Third, the definition of forest degradation contained in EUDR, which is not internationally recognized, prohibits EU trade in timber products from plantations established after 2020 on land converted from natural forests. This seems particularly perverse when it is considered that the development of globally competitive forest products industries in the EU during the course of the last century has been heavily dependent on conversion of degraded natural forests into more intensively managed plantations. Fourth is the requirement that scientific names be used to identify all 3 species contained in products placed on the EU market. This requirement could have a negative impact on a trade which historically has been based on the genus of the tree rather than the very specific species. In fact, trade names are more commonly used and well understood by both producers and consumers. This requirement for scientific names begs the question, are there enough tropical dendrology experts to do this? Fifth, the obligation to provide geolocation data for all individual plots of land defined as within a single real estate property, from which all timber content and consignment may have derived, will be particularly challenging for all products derived from smallholders, for composite products such as furniture, and for products such as panel, where there may be widespread use of mill co-products and other waste material. The EU DR requirements have potential to differentiate against small and medium-sized enterprises, of which there are many tens of thousands, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands in the tropical timber sector. It threatens to roll back years of work in the interest of sustainability to add value to timber products prior to export from tropical countries, and to ensure the most efficient utilization of all wood material. TEC recognizes the importance of demonstrating the legal and sustainable provenance of all products placed on the international market. And as such, TEC has long advocated for the development and promotion of timber legality assurances and forest certification schemes in tropical countries. However, the successful implementation of these schemes is critically dependent on dialogue and the active engagement of stakeholders. Attempts to impose systems by outside agencies without adequate engagement have failed in the past. In view of this, TEC welcomes the EU commitment in Article 30 of the EUDR to evolve forest partnerships with tropical countries that allow full participation of all stakeholders. Alongside the recent announcement of the Team Europe initiatives on deforestation-free value chain, which aims to facilitate an inclusive transition to deforestation-free and legal supply chains to the EU. In developing these forest partnerships, TEC would urge that the EU takes full and proper account of the concerns raised in this statement and of the significant positive contribution of the legal trade in the tropical forest products to mitigate the risk of deforestation. Members of the TEC stand ready to work with EU so as to ensure a smooth implementation of a simple and practical system to address the aims of the EUDR. Would the EU accept our hand of cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you very much to Barney from the Trade Advisory Group for that statement. With that, I draw to a close our proceedings for today, and also just to thank again civil society and trade advisory groups for their facilitation and coordination of all the speakers we've heard today and for the sessions. Thank you very much. One final note that if the Chair's Bureau could now convene upstairs in the usual location. Otherwise, thank you all very much for your participation and the extensive contributions and discussions today, and we will see you all again tomorrow. Have a good evening.